problem falling asleep, I can fall asleep like right now if I need to.
All right, I'm gonna send her a
But they
Skype
said for people having a hard time
That's not
counting the sheep is not helpful because it's so simple for our brains. But if you try to count backwards by threes from like
Oh, because it'll just be
400,
beeping, yes.
Yeah, we
Then
can't
you'll
access it,
Yeah.
so.
get used to
Your mind.
By 3:50, you're out, huh?
something, right? Yeah.
Oh,
Jerry, do
Whoop.
you have your name?
Jerry, can you pop your plate out in front there? Your name?
Oh,
We
wanna
don't
know
want to
who
get
you are.
confused.
you want it facing this way or?
I want it facing the camera.
Excuse me.
Got some humor this morning.
We don't have access to that. and we
National
don't
Crack a
power it
Joke
off.
Month.
It'll beep through the whole meeting.
Must be
So I
somewhere.
didn't do that. I didn't
Sarah,
even
what's our
think when
bulletin
you
board
came
this month? I
by.
couldn't remember.
Sorry.
Rick's trying to fix that.
Preparedness?
Yeah.
Prepare.
Oh, it won't turn on.
Sorry, I'm not sure if this is gonna come alive.
Well, I'm gonna hope for the.
Well, we'll live with it.
Ooh, how adorable.
We're
That's my
getting on
computer,
TV.
I was gonna say
That's
this.
your computer?
Yeah, but it's, let's see.
It's not liking to distribute it to those.
Turn off.
You guys want to turn them off? I don't know if you want to turn them off.
I tell you.
So unplug your power.
Problem with these.
If you unplug both cords.
Just to unplug it.
Okay.
Hand me the remote control.
Well, I wasn't plugged in anyway, was I?
Was the dance recital?
Yeah, you're still plugged in, Ginny.
So good.
The small one.
The
Starts
smaller
on
one?
Wednesday.
If the smaller one will just do it.
Yeah, it was up there.
Allison's
Can we
son
plug
was
them
in
back in or no?
the dance recital.
No, we'll do it when the
He just
meeting's done, or
danced
we'll
his
have
heart out.
perpetual beeping. Okay, so while they're working on that, we'll at least get started, since the public is probably tuned in. We will call to order the Public Health and Human Service Board meeting for October 15th. We're having a little bit, thank you, we're having a little bit technical difficulty, so with all this beeping, just a friendly reminder, if you have your cell phones, if you could please turn them off so that we don't have those interruptions later. Thank you. And then we will start with the approval of the consent agenda. Is there anything anyone would like to pull? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Thanks, Joe the Knight. All in favor? Aye. All right, staff report, vulnerable adult protection. We have Martina and Olivia.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So we're here to talk with you today about adult protection. Cook County Public Health and Human Services, or PHHS, has a role in creating safety for vulnerable adults by connecting them with resources and supportive services. PHHS is also responsible for investigating reports of adults who have been maltreated. It is the statutory responsibility of Cook County PHHS to provide adult protective services and to respond to reports of suspected maltreatment of vulnerable adults made under the Vulnerable Adult Act. Adult protective services include intake, response to emergency adult protective service notifications, investigations, and safety planning to remediate and prevent maltreatment experienced by vulnerable adults. Maltreatment, including neglect and financial exploitation, is experienced by 1 out of 10 people ages 60 and older who live at home. This statistic is likely an underestimate because many victims are unable or afraid to disclose or report the violence. The place where reports can be made and should be made in the state of Minnesota is the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center, or MARC. And MARC was implemented throughout the state of Minnesota July 1st, 2015. All adult maltreatment reports are made to this centralized call center, and it's staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The number is 844-880-1574. Mandated reporters can submit reports online, and I've listed the link there, but the quicker one is mn.gov/DHS/report adult abuse /. And if you're wondering what a mandated reporter is, there's a statute that clearly defines it. That's 626.5572, subdivision 16. But examples of mandated reporters include doctors, social workers, nurses, chiropractors, home health providers, dentists, therapists, pharmacists, and even veterinarians.
And some staff, like YMCA staff, are required reporters.
Especially in the childcare area too.
Yeah,
So
I was gonna
anybody
ask
working
you.
with children, including in the schools, although that doesn't necessarily apply directly to Vulnerable Adult Act, but
Okay.
anybody working in a capacity helping others essentially is typically a mandated reporter.
Thank you.
Is there a distinction between an adult mandated reporter and a youth mandated reporter?
That's a good question. I'm not sure per the statute, but like Olivia said, I think it's okay to err on the side of caution. If you're a mandated reporter for children, you're likely also a mandated reporter for adults and vice versa.
Thank you.
So the Vulnerable Adult Act, it was in April 1980, Governor Al Key signed Minnesota's Vulnerable Adult Act into law. The Act's definition and related laws are 626.557, the reporting of maltreatment of vulnerable adults, 626.5571, there's a multidisciplinary adult protection team that can be formed, and we actually have one of those here in Cook County. 626.5572 gives the definitions. 626.5573 gives negligence actions, and then the administrative rules. Department of Human Services rules govern the investigation and reporting of maltreatment of vulnerable adults and some aspects of the emergency and continuing protective social services required to be furnished by local social services agencies under the Vulnerable Adult Act. Definition of vulnerable adult in Minnesota. These are the definitions that we have to follow when we're determining whether or not to screen a report in. And I think it can get tricky for the general public just thinking, I know this person is vulnerable, and you're probably right. But we have to put a person into one of these two categories in order to proceed with an investigation. So a categorical vulnerable adult is any person 18 years of age or older who is a resident or inpatient of a facility or receives services from a provider listed within the statute, including foster care, assisted living services, and home care. And I give this example every year because some people aren't aware of this, but when you are in the hospital as an inpatient, you are considered to be protected under the Vulnerable Adult Act. You're considered to be a categorical vulnerable adult. A functional vulnerable adult is any person 18 years of age or older, regardless of residence or whether any type of service is received, possesses a physical or mental infirmity or other physical, mental, or emotional dysfunction that impairs the individual's ability to provide adequately for the individual's own care without assistance, including the provision of food, shelter, clothing, health care, or supervision, and because of the individual's dysfunction or infirmity, and the need for care or services, the individual has an impaired ability to protect his or herself from maltreatment. So that is a more difficult category for us to define. It's pretty gray and it's subjective. But just to give an example of a functional vulnerable adult, so this would be someone that's in the community that's not receiving services from a licensed provider. For example, someone that's a person that's in a wheelchair and they're dependent upon another person for assistance in getting in and out of that wheelchair. Even if they are cognitively intact, so they know they're oriented, they are able to direct their own cares, because they're in that wheelchair and they're dependent on someone to physically help them move in and out, they would not necessarily be able to protect themselves from maltreatment, and they would be protected under the statute and considered a functional vulnerable adult. Oops, sorry.
That was a great example.
So it can be really confusing when you're trying to weed through what a vulnerable adult is, because again, Martina made a really good point. Often we feel very many people are vulnerable, but you have to fit into a category for us to be able to take action, so it can be difficult.
So Minnesota statute defines 3 types of maltreatment: abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. Under abuse, the statute looks at emotional abuse, which would be, for example, an individual who's a caregiver ignoring the elder, isolating the elder from his or her family or friends, habitual scapegoating or blaming, harassment, name-calling, threatening to punish or deprive, yelling or screaming. Physical abuse, pushing, pinching, shoving, burning, biting, force-feeding, also the inappropriate use of medications and physical restraints. And sexual abuse, unwanted sexual contact of any kind, including forcing an elder to witness sexual behaviors. Neglect is split into 2 categories: caregiver neglect and self-neglect. Caregiver neglect is the failure to provide supervision or monitoring, failure to provide adequate food or water, abandonment, denial or delay of medical care, inadequate help with hygiene or bathing, are just a few examples. Self-neglect, denying self or ignoring the need for food or water, bathing or personal hygiene, proper clothing for the weather, essential medications, or medical attention for serious illness. Financial exploitation is split into those 2 categories. So in a fiduciary relationship, that would be someone who is a power of attorney, representative payee, guardian, conservator, responsible party, or trustee. Or not in a fiduciary relationship, so that would be anyone who comes into contact with the vulnerable adult and financially exploits them. And some examples of financial exploitation: cashing an elder's checks without authorization, using an elder's charge card number for one's own benefit, withdrawing cash from a bank account without the person's permission, enrolling an individual in unneeded services or subscriptions, requesting and receiving donations under false pretenses. Just a few examples of the many. So when we receive a report of maltreatment, it comes to us at the county through the MARC system. So the Minnesota Adult Abuse Report Center is linked to a system that we use called SSIS, or the Social Services Information System. So we get all those reports in electronically. And when we receive a report, we have to determine, is the person a vulnerable adult? And if we decide that yes, they are, and we determine that what appears to be maltreatment is occurring, we decide to screen in or open up an investigation. If the VA is not in need of immediate care or protection but is allegedly abused, the investigation shall begin within 24 hours. If the VA is not in need of immediate care or protection, is not allegedly abused, nor has allegedly been neglected, the investigation shall begin within 72 hours. So if we get a report, an allegation of financial exploitation, it gives us a little bit more time before we need to respond. So 72 hours.
Does this include weekends?
It does, yep. Within 5 days, we need to notify the reporter of the initial disposition if they have requested that and if it would not endanger the vulnerable adult. And within 60 days, we need to complete our investigation and our final disposition, and that's 60 calendar days. And there are times when we need more time, and we just do an extension and we let the reporter know about that.
So if I called dispatch to report, they would lead me to MARC?
Yes.
So everything goes through MARC?
Yes.
Okay.
So the investigation outcomes that conclusions that we come to: substantiated, which means that there's a preponderance of the evidence that shows that an act that meets the definition of maltreatment occurred. False is a preponderance of the evidence shows that an act that meets the definition of maltreatment did not occur. And inconclusive, less than a preponderance of evidence to show that an act that meets the definition of maltreatment did or did not occur. No determination, and that would be if an investigation was not possible because maybe the person is deceased and it has nothing to do with the alleged maltreatment, or we've decided that the individual does not meet that definition of being a categorical or a functional vulnerable adult. Criminal charges can also come from investigations. The law enforcement, the sheriff's office, they have a separate, they're kind of working simultaneously alongside with us, and they can come to the conclusion with the county attorney that criminal charges need to be made. Reports to licensing certification boards, so if the alleged perpetrator was a nurse, a doctor, a therapist, or an educator, and the allegation was substantiated, this can show on, reports can be made to whatever licensing or certification board they're part of. And the investigation results also interface with the Minnesota Licensing Agency's Department of Human Services Office of Health Facility Complaints.
The Office of Health Facility Complaints is primarily hospital and nursing home allegations. So a lot of the suspected abuse that happens within these care facilities ends up going to the Department of Human Services directly. Sometimes it gets bounced back to us, but it's very rarely. There are multiple investigative agencies.
So the investigation outcomes also can include that we might get a report that is maybe regarding a self-neglect concern, and it opens up the opportunity for us to meet with someone who wasn't already connected with our agency or any services, and it allows us to talk with them about resources and get them connected. So we have what's called a Min Choices assessment, and that we do those within our agency, and that's a screening or assessment looking at a person's, their full picture, their medical history, their current medical needs, their social needs, needs for services, current supports. It's just looking at the full picture and coming up with some suggestions for them to meet their goals. We also coordinate between agencies, so we work with, like I said, the Sheriff's Office, we work with North Shore Home Care, with Care Partners, just a variety of community agencies. It might result in an individual who is in an unsafe situation being placed in a facility if they're needing more care. It might result in guardianship or conservatorship, so someone else taking that decision-making role on for the person, and referral for services. So why does elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation happen? There are many different factors that contribute to the abuse, neglect, or exploitation of an elder. Cognitive impairments, elders who struggle with memory, reasoning, and judgment are at greater risk for abuse, neglect, and exploitation because they may not realize they are being victimized or don't think anyone will believe them. Intimate partner violence. Elder abuse in couples may be intimate partner violence that has been going on for many years. These are partnerships in which one person has traditionally tried to exert power and control over the other through emotional abuse, physical violence and threats, isolation, and other tactics. Perpetrator characteristics and circumstances. Abusers often are dependent on their victims for financial assistance, housing, and other forms of support. The risk of elder abuse increases when the abuser has the opportunity and greater access to the elder's records and personal information. This is especially true when the perpetrators have substance abuse issues, financial problems, or other personal crises. Isolation. Elders who are living alone are at higher risk because they may not want to or be able to ask for help. But even elders living with others may become isolated when an abusive caregiver cuts them off from other people. Money and property is another reason why abuse, neglect, and exploitation happens. Social Security, pension, savings, and property owned by the elderly may make them a target for abuse, exploitation, and other financial crimes. Warning signs that you and others might be looking for if you suspect abuse, neglect, or exploitation. So with physical and sexual abuse, bruises, pressure marks, broken bones, abrasions, and burns, often accompanied with an inconsistent explanation for how they occurred. Internal injuries that you're made aware of might also be a sign. With neglect, dehydration, malnutrition, weight loss, poor hygiene, absence of needed supervision, and lack of necessary equipment or health aids. Financial exploitation, you might see that a person who you thought typically they were well off, they had the money they needed to pay for things, all of a sudden they're being denied basic financial, they're saying they've gone to the credit union, they have no money in their account, or they're not paying their bills. They've been asked to co-sign on documents, there's abrupt asset transfers or abrupt changes to an important document such as a will or a power of attorney form. And then other general warning signs: unexplained withdrawal from normal activities, a sudden change in alertness, unusual depression, bed sores, unattended medical needs, poor hygiene, unusual weight loss, belittling, making threats, and other uses of power and control by spouses, loved ones, or caretakers, strained or tense relationships, sudden changes in financial situations.
And the tough thing with a lot of the warning signs are they also coincide with people having changes in their healthcare status. Declining, having issues cognitively, a lot of those can look like warning signs of abuse, but it's actually just the person or individual having changes that are fairly normal.
It's worth reporting because they may not be aware they're having changes, and then you guys will help them get the programs they need.
Through it. Another big thing too with financial exploitation, a lot of people don't realize that they're taking advantage of finances in a potentially exploitive way. People are often trying to be helpful and protective of assets. That can look good on one side, but on the flip side, if someone's not getting their needs met because we're trying to protect assets over here, that can be really dangerous for an individual, particularly if they need more like nursing care or need to be in a nursing home. That's expensive, and a lot of assets get withdrawn at that point. People do a lot to try to minimize that, to help my mom or dad or help my friend or family. But it's not always in the best interest of the individual.
So this slide here shows the reports of alleged maltreatment in Cook County from July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2019. I usually give this presentation in July, so that's why I have these dates. So next year, hopefully I'll see you in July. But for that period of time, Cook County PHHS received 25 reports of maltreatment. Only 15 of those reports were open for investigation, and that's for the reasons that we talked about earlier. And then also, sometimes we get reports from MARC that don't even belong to our county. So we call it bouncing them back. We get a lot of reports for Cook, the city of Cook, Minnesota. So that's one reason why this number is a little bit smaller. Out of that 15, 4 allegations of, I think I was looking at the total, reports open for investigation. 4 allegations of caregiver neglect, 8 allegations of self-neglect, 2 allegations of emotional abuse, and 1 allegation of physical abuse. And the reason those numbers don't add up is because one report can contain multiple allegations. So there could be an allegation of caregiver neglect as well as emotional abuse and physical abuse all in one report. Principles of adult protection. So when interests compete, the adult client is the only person we are charged to serve, not the community concerned about safety, the landlords concerned about property, citizens concerned about crime or morality, or families concerned about their own health or finances. I think that this can be a difficult one for individuals to understand, and understandably so, that when someone makes a report of concern, a lot of times they want to see action right away, or they think this person is really suffering and why aren't you doing anything? And really we are charged with looking at the adult and deciding One, do they have the capacity, the mental capacity, the cognitive capacity to make decisions? And if they do, even if they're making decisions that other people don't like or agree with, we have to continue to allow them to make the decisions that they want to make. We also, we receive a lot of reports of hoarding, and landlords, understandably so, who say, please clean this up right away, take care of this. Once again, we're working with the individual, and that is a situation, a condition, a behavior, I should say, that can take quite a long time to work through and alleviate and get the situation taken care of. So our focus is always, of course, we want to work with landlords and the community and all of that, but our focus is always on the individual and their needs and meeting their needs at their pace. The second principle, a person can choose to live in harm or even self-destructively, provided he or she is competent to choose, does not harm others, and commits no crimes. Freedom is more important than safety, and I touched on that already, that it's really important to us to honor a person's right to self-determination for as long as it's safe for them to continue to make decisions. And then in serving the adult client, the full range of social work skills must be used to assure that the client is fully aware of alternatives, can make an informed choice, and understands the consequences of that choice. So we're working with each individual, each family situation, and providing them with information so that they know what their options are and they know what the services are that are available in our community. Questions?
Does anyone have questions? Go ahead.
Yes. You mentioned there's an adult protection team. How does that work?
So the statute allows for us to have a team. We have a meeting every month, and our team includes representatives from the community. So we have several social work staff that sit on the team. The sheriff's office has representatives. The county attorney's office has an opportunity to attend. Representative from the clinic, the care center, and other agencies in the community. And the individuals who attend sign a confidentiality agreement that anything that we discuss in the meeting is to be kept within the meeting. And we meet to just discuss concerns that we have. We talk about, at the beginning of each meeting, it's sort of an opportunity to talk about business, so anything that's coming up within the next month, any just widespread issues that we're all kind of seeing, that we're all kind of aware of, that we want to touch base about, and then we talk about situations that have come up and we would like to consult with the group about.
Very good, thank you.
Any other questions? Jerry?
I know I ask this question every year, but how do you feel the MAP system works? Is it effective to have reports go to this centralized place and then come back to our county?
I think it's working well. I think I like the fact that it allows people to be anonymous. So I think it takes a little bit of the pressure off that you're just calling a place located somewhere far from here, that they're not going to know your voice. They're not going to know anything about you, and you can have the option of not giving your name when you make the report. It also helps with tracking the number of actual reports that are coming in. I think it's been a good thing. I know that there were some people that were kind of frustrated with it, and people always still have the option of calling us if they feel comfortable, and we can make a report on their behalf, but we always have to go through the MARC system. But
another nice part about the system too is that there's a third party then that's reviewing the situation before it even gets to us.
Mhm.
So they actually at MARC will make a determination if this is an emergency protective situation, meaning we need to respond right now, or if it's just a general adult protection report, meaning that we respond within 24 to 72 hours. So I think it's great because it's just another tier and another set of eyes and ears hearing this situation. So it's not just right here. There's others that are hearing this and making determinations as well.
Does the system keep track of found cases, especially for people in the healthcare providing field, so that that would be accessible on a background check?
Yes.
Good.
So does law enforcement, can they do the MARC system for someone calling in? If-
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
That was my only concern, because some people, they want to report and they get told you have to
Mhm.
call this number and go online, and then they hang up the phone and get on social media and tell everybody that law enforcement doesn't want to help them.
Right. Yeah.
Can patch
Awesome.
them right through or can help actually assist
Oh,
with that if we
perfect.
can too. So
They even have the option of making a report on behalf of someone. I actually do that pretty frequently, where if someone's not willing to call MARC themselves, I can go in and I say, I'm making this report on behalf of so-and-so in my role as a mandated reporter.
Awesome. I was looking at the beginning slides of not having the proper clothing, and I think of my wonderful grandmother who loves her Tevas that she likes to wear all winter, and if you sat down and talked to her, for her, having winter boots on, she's lost her ability with walking and feeling and negotiating that, so she feels better with them on. But when you see anyone who sees my grandma walking out in the winter in her sandals, it's actually better for her.
And the beauty is that our community does take action and does take the step to report things. There's nothing better than having a community willing to look out for one another. So every report we receive, it's like a positive, knowing that, hey, we're looking out for each other. Whether it's good or bad, whoever's intentions, it doesn't matter. The beauty is that there are reports coming through and that people do care about one another and that it's all, within the community. So.
And sometimes it's better if a stranger tells her not to wear sandals outside in the winter. Go ahead.
Thanks for all you do in this regard. And I remember when these laws first came in, we had the Good Samaritan rule, and I assume when you're speaking about that, that's part of the law still. I know it was
Yeah,
at one time.
I'm sorry I didn't cover that. But yes, if someone's making a report in good faith, there is no action that can be taken against them. If it's determined that someone has made a report in bad faith and there's proof of that, that's another story. But if you think that someone is in harm's way and it's coming from the goodness of your heart and you're just seeing a small portion of their life and you make a report, you're not going to get in trouble for doing that.
Any other questions? Thank you both.
Thank you.
You have staff updates and agency
I
updates?
do. I want to start by echoing the thanks and appreciation for Martina and Olivia for your presentation this morning and for everything that you do to promote safety for elders in the community and investigating reports. So thank you both.
Thank you.
The biggest update that I have for you this month related to our staffing is that we enjoyed a sweet 3 months of being fully staffed in PHHS. Our adult mental health case manager submitted his resignation just 2 weeks ago. His resignation and approval to post was approved at the October 8th board meeting, the regular board meeting. It's currently posted internal only per our Cook County Employment Association guidelines, at which point that internal posting closes on October 19th, after which we will review a list of eligible applicants who have applied within the last 6 months, as we just did recently hire a social worker. We had a number of qualified candidates apply at that point. We would be able to revisit that register rather than reposting, but that would be Plan C in this situation if we don't have any interested internal candidates or anyone interested from that eligible 6-month register of people who have recently applied and been interviewed. One of James's roles, in addition to adult mental health case management, was as a CD case manager, chemical dependency case manager, so helping people who are in need of inpatient services to access treatment. As you know, we are proposing a treatment coordination position for 2020. So we're looking at timing for that, hiring a new person, potentially training them on that CD case management, or would there be a way to look at reassigning some of those duties internally in the interim, just in the interest of minimizing transitions, both for our staff and for the clients that we're working with in that area. So I will continue to keep you up to date on how this recent vacancy is impacting our staffing plans for 2020, but just want to give you a heads up of that. We'll be addressing it somewhat at the Personnel Committee this afternoon. As I mentioned last month at our meeting, we're continuing to explore and evaluate staffing for 2020 with the new position that we have proposed for treatment coordination. As I introduced to you all last month, we're looking at the potential of becoming certified to provide daytime crisis response. That is one of the very significant gaps following the closure of HDC last year. HDC was historically providing that daytime crisis response. Since their closure, that has fallen back on our staff, often with maybe a case manager who's currently working with that client, or our intake social worker. We're often troubleshooting in partnership with staff up at the hospital or ER, or in law enforcement or Grand Portage Human Services staff. So by taking this on formally, it would allow us to access some of the revenue from the state in providing that service. So what we're proposing is to pair the treatment coordination with the daytime crisis response and hire a part-time public health educator. Again, I'll give you more updates as this progresses, as we learn more from the state. Lori has made these updates within our budget for 2020 already to represent a full-time position in social services and a half-time position in public health. It has no impact on our bottom line, no impact on our levy request for 2020. It's just a shifting of resources within the department. Another factor in the proposal of the half-time public health position, and I'll say more about this later on in the agency report and give Grace an opportunity to comment as well, but we're in the process of applying for a grant which would add capacity in our work in housing as a health issue. This grant would allow us to hire a half-time position, to work with community agencies, to work with people who are experiencing housing instability. So if we would receive the grant funds for this position, that would be a natural fit with the half-time health educator. A lot of the skills and competencies would be very similar for this person. The qualifications for this individual would be very similar. And again, that's contingent on our receiving grant funds, which we won't know definitively until early December. So we're just looking at assumptions there, what that would look like as a half-time position, what that would look like as a full-time position, ensuring that we're including in our grant request that this would be a benefits eligible position if it were full-time, and ensuring that we have space within our budget to offer the benefits for a full-time eligible position. So again, I hope to give you more detail, including what that looks like in our budget proposal for 2020 at the November meeting, once we have more information on the proposal.
Great.
In the consent agenda, you received an updated financial report, 2019 year-to-date. We're 70% of the way through the year, and we've spent about 63% of our budget so far. That's about where we would expect to be at this point because of delays with billing. We make payments just once a month with the board bills, so we're always at least a month behind. Similarly with revenue is received a few months after a quarter ends, so we will not receive all of our 2019 revenue until into 2020. Another update from our fiscal team. I try to be a little balanced in the areas that I bring reports on each month, as there's a lot of work going on upstairs, as you know, but our fiscal team recently received a report from the State Department of Human Services on our county estate recoveries through September 2019. You might remember earlier this year we wrote an article for the News Herald about our role and our mandate to recover on eligible medical assistance estates. When someone received medical assistance after they pass, if they have remaining estates, our assets, we are obligated by law to recover on those and return those funds to the state and to the federal government. So we found that through September of 2019, our agency is in the top half of counties statewide for our recoveries, despite our small size and population. We wouldn't expect these numbers to be that high going forward, as there was some catch-up on previous year's collections. And just a reminder, too, that the county only retains 25% of those collections. The majority of that goes back to the state and to the federal government to continue to support the Medicaid program. But I just wanted to recognize our staff for developing the policies and procedures to ensure that we're meeting our obligations with the state recovery. A big piece of that has been our partnership with the county attorney's office, who has supported our mission and our obligation in that work, as well as other counties who have provided technical assistance and training to our staff. So kudos to Plowman and Lori for doing that difficult work. As I mentioned earlier, Grace has been leading an initiative to, in partnership with the EDA, to apply for grant funds to increase our capacity to do work in increasing affordable housing, really from the health equity lens. How can we bring the people who are most disproportionately impacted by housing insecurity into the center of the conversation? So this proposal, we were invited into the second round of proposals. So we have, I believe, 2 more rounds, right, Grace?
Yep, there's another round that's due on Thursday, and then if we make it to the next round, there's an interview in early November, and then we'll know whether we've been awarded funding early December.
So the proposal is centered on building a local collaborative dedicated to housing work. So bringing together the agencies who are already intimately involved in this work or who have an interest, like healthcare, social services, city government, county government, the EDA. This is a priority identified in our community health improvement plan. I want to say it was 97% of the local respondents who responded to our survey said that affordable housing was the #1 health issue in Cook County. So the model is reconvening the partner agencies, bringing people together to talk about how do we develop a shared mission for housing work in Cook County. Another key piece of that is the half-time Healthy Homes Coordinator, who would be really take a lead in that engagement, working with other agencies, working with the public to learn about what the most pressing needs are. At the end of the project period, the goal would be to have a collaborative entity dedicated to housing as essential both for economic and the human health of Cook County. And again, this is an area where we feel we can help build capacity and develop in addressing this very complex problem. And Grace is here if anyone has specific questions about that request.
Any questions?
Good work, comment. Yeah, very important.
Thanks.
My last update before Grace gives an update on the tobacco ordinance is that, and again, Grace can speak to this more perhaps if you have questions, but we have a few upcoming engagement and education events that were shared in the meeting materials. One will be 2 sessions to present some of the information that was gathered through the community listening sessions in the Rural Mamas Connect program. You might remember Grace was working with Kristen Wharton as well as staff at the school and the clinic to host listening sessions this summer. And this will be a way just presenting the data, what was gathered through those listening sessions and surveys. So there will be 2 sessions to learn more about the experiences of recently pregnant and parenting families in Cook County. There will also be 2 sessions sharing a report on the summary of Cook County's health assessment and health improvement plan. So that's been ongoing since 2017 when we started gathering the stakeholders together to review health data, to create the community survey that went out in the fall of 2017. So reviewing what the priority health issues were as defined by that group, and then how public health is working to convene groups in those priority areas currently and into the future for this 5-year plan. So encourage any of you who are able to attend.
Great, thank you.
And I did bring flyers, which I'll leave in the back in case anyone wants to take them and spread them through the community afterwards.
Thank you, Grace.
Awesome, thank you.
That's all I have, unless there are questions.
Any questions on the updates? All right, let's move into the update on the tobacco ordinance.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me here again. I believe all of the written materials are included in the packet, but I'll go through some of the comments I received after the Committee of the Whole meeting back in September on the proposed revised ordinance to raise the age to purchase commercial tobacco to 21 in Cook County. So before I get into the comments from the Public Health Law Center, I wanted to summarize what the next steps in the process are. So today we'll be looking over the work and the questions that the group had back in September, and make sure that all of you have the chance to review the ordinance language once again and ask any questions. Then next Tuesday at the county board meeting, all of the commissioners will have a vote on whether to approve publishing the amended ordinance and setting a date for a public hearing. At this point, the letter to affected retailers would be sent out after the public hearing date is set. And then after or at the public hearing, all of you commissioners will have a chance to vote on the proposed ordinance change. So that's where things go from here. And this might all seem, very standard to you, but this is the first time that PHHS has been involved in ordinance change. So for my own kind of clarity of process, this is what I've found in talking with staff and with the county attorney, Molly Hicken. So to get right into the follow-up questions from the Committee of the Whole meeting, the questions all reference specific sections in the ordinance. So the first question was about the specificity of ages for youth for the compliance and enforcement checks. So right now, all counties are required to do compliance checks every year for every business that has a tobacco license. So enacting this revised ordinance would mean that the county would have to check both age groups in order to ensure that it's enforcing the local law. So according to what other counties have done and what the Public Health Law Center recommends, the county could do at least one compliance check per licensee site per year, bringing 2 individuals to the check, one that would be between the ages of 15 and 17, and one that would be between the ages of 18 or 20. Or the county would be able to conduct more than one compliance check per licensee per year, bringing one youth from each age group to each compliance check. And that's a choice for the county. And we would be able to put that language into the ordinance based on what would be the easiest for us to enforce. So I did send this to Sheriff Eliason. I haven't heard back from him yet, but he's aware that this is what the response was to that question, because I know part of that came from law enforcement. So I might stop for questions after every section, just because I think it might get to be a lot of information if we go through it all. Are there any questions about the compliance check piece? Go ahead, Commissioner.
Just to clarify, under state law, currently, a compliance check has to happen with a youth between the age of 15 and 17.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were to enact a Tobacco 21 ordinance, we still have to meet that state law. And then the state law requires a potential check for 18 to 20 years old? Or that's what our ordinance?
That's what the ordinance would require. Until the state would pass something similar to Tobacco 21, it would be in order for us locally to know that we're enforcing the revised ordinance.
If we're already required, if we passed T21, and we're already required to do compliance checks with 15 to 17, that's still less than 21. So it seems very redundant to do another one. And as long as the state's not requiring that, I don't understand why we would.
I don't know if we're saying do another one, we're just expanding the range of age to include up to 20.
Well, no, that would take, according to the response, a county must check both age groups, which.
I could see just, I
It seems like twice the work.
Checking the 18 to 20-year-old range as being what would make, what would enforce the ordinance change. I think for thoroughness sake, the Public Health Law Center recommends doing between 15 and 17 and between 18 and 20.
Do you understand what I'm getting
So
at?
are you saying make it 15 to 20 instead of two different ranges?
Well, what I'm saying is the state requires
Yes.
15 to 17.
Yep.
What I'm not understanding is why it would be required to
How
have
you would add the,
an 18 to 20. Like the 15 to 17 is already less than 21. We're already checking compliance there.
yeah.
Why do we
Because we
need?
want to check if 18, 19, and 20-year-olds are also being provided tobacco products.
That would be the portion that that would be the age group that would be affected by the ordinance change. And so
Right.
in order to know that locally retailers are not selling to people under the age of 18, but also not selling to people between the ages of 18 and 20, there'd have to be some mechanism for making sure that we're actually enforcing that.
I think
that
that's
piece of
illogical.
ordinance.
I think that, yeah, I don't agree with that. Because if you're checking for 15 to 17, that's still checking that they're not 21. It's not that you have to, it makes as much logic sense to say we need a 15-year-old check, a 16-year-old check, a 17-year-old check, an 18-year-old check, a 19, like it's the same, that's the same logic.
That's why I asked if you want to change it to 15 to 20, because then you do
Well,
the
that's
check
state law
once.
though. Oh, in our ordinance.
Yes.
Thank you.
Because
That's
we
what I
can be
didn't
stricter
understand.
than the state, but not less strict than the
Yeah,
state.
I would highly lean towards a single check than making
changing the
twice
range.
as much, but I don't know what.
And Jerry's got his hand up.
Yeah, I do.
Well, I think another way to come at this would be to ask the question, is one compliance check in a year an adequate sampling of what's happening out there? Seems pretty reasonable that you could try it a couple of times using the two different age checkers that are specified here, but you'd get a better idea of whether the one was accurate compared to the other one.
Carla?
Well, I assume that when you do the compliance check, you would write down the age of the minor. So there would be a record of the 15 versus the 18. But I think I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the history was that it was hard to get in the one check with law enforcement per
Yes.
facility. That's what I remember. I think Joni talked about.
I think Pat talked about it also. Myron?
I guess my take on it is that you're meeting the state statute requirements of the first age group that you're concerned about, 15 to 17. But when you pass an ordinance, then you have to have a check based upon that ordinance. And so that would be a local thing but I think from a legal point of view, they're recommending this because you have to have some kind of enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I see it.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, the reason I guess this, I don't know why, but compliance check, the concept of compliance checks using minors gives me an icky feeling. And so I was trying to figure this out, and then why I felt that way. And then also Sheriff Eliason's concern at the committee of the whole meeting regarding cooperative youths whose ages aren't known in our community is a challenge for him. And so that's why then I started just questioning, like, well, wait a minute, this seems redundant and it's an additional burden on our law enforcement. If they're already having a hard time with it, I don't want to make it harder for them.
It does say in the language that you can do one check per year with 2 individuals.
Yep.
So you wouldn't have to do 2 separate checks.
But I mean, you
You'd
still have to find 2 individuals. There's
You
still
would.
that burden.
Yes.
And I think that is the burden, or part of the burden. So anyways, I have concerns about that.
Sure.
And I'd like to know if we can just do I
think it would be a local decision. I think as long as we're meeting the state statute, the local decision would be about enforcing the expanded age range. And I think that's why Public Health Law Center is recommending it, because if we're not adding anyone in that 18 to 20 range, how would we actually know that we're enforcing the revised ordinance? I will also say that there is additional grant funding available to assist with compliance checks through the Association of Non-Smokers in Minnesota. They have done training for law enforcement here in the past, and they also have helped other counties, and this is something I confirmed with other Northeast counties, is that in smaller communities, they'll sometimes work across jurisdictions to help with the challenge of finding someone who's willing to be a part of the compliance checks that is from a different community. So I think that challenge of finding people who are able to be part of the compliance checks will remain regardless, just because of the size of the community. And I do think there are some resources to help us, regardless of the decision that the board decides to take.
And Dave, there's only 14 businesses with a tobacco license.
that was 9 more than I was expecting.
Carla?
Well, again, I'm flashing back to Joni talking, and she used to say they should be from another county because the youth, and that's hard because it's a small, everyone knows, a lot
And
of
she's
the
saying we
ages.
can get resources to help with
And I
that.
still believe that on the report, if you really want to know the 18 and up, it'll be there. I mean, you're going to be checked if you look like you're under 20. Or if you look, you're 23 even, they'll ask you. So there'll be a physical report. I don't know legally if you can do it, but it is a duplication.
I love getting carded at the casino.
Right, I'll go. I'll volunteer as a child.
So I don't know that we need to come
No,
to
because there's
consensus today.
Yep.
So we can keep going and just
Thank you.
know that this is something that's going to come back up next week when the board looks at this again and decides when to set a date. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. So the other question, this came from Attorney Hicken, was about the hearing officer. So this is in regards to if a business has a complaint against them for selling to someone who's under the legal age of purchase, that they're entitled to a hearing. And the question from Molly was, if we don't have a hearing officer in Cook County, so what are other small communities doing to meet the need for a hearing officer? And in talking to her, actually the need for a hearing officer isn't limited to tobacco licensing. It comes up in other places as well. So the response from the Public Health Law Center is, if the county has a local ordinance establishing a hearing process, then we would look to that. But if we don't have that process in place, and it appears that we do not, the commissioners can contract for a neutral individual to act as the hearing officer. And that many contract with the State of Minnesota Office of Administrative Hearings, which has statutory authority to contract with counties and cities to provide trained administrative law judges for administrative proceedings such as this type of licensing matter. And so that information was shared with Attorney Hicken and was, I think, useful beyond this ordinance, just because it sets in place what we could do to contract with a hearing officer if we needed to. Any questions about that response?
Nope.
Okay. So then the question about the duty-free store. So how would this ordinance change affect the duty-free store? So the duty-free store is licensed by Cook County. And so since that's the case, then it would be subject to the revised ordinance, the Tobacco 21 ordinance. And so tobacco products sold in that store could only be sold to people ages 21 and over.
I did talk to Mike, and they sell alcohol to 19-year-olds. So if you're coming down from Canada and it's delivered to the border, then you can be 19 and purchase alcohol in Minnesota. If you're going through the other way, and the tobacco ordinance would work the same way for people going back into Canada. So the 21 and older is only U.S. residents who are not going back into Canada.
Okay. Any questions about that one?
He also did say he supports the ordinance.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's what I was going to ask, was if there was any more
Yeah.
feedback. And
Makes sense.
All right, and then the concerns about exemption for tribal members using tobacco for traditional purposes. So this one, when we were talking about it at Committee of the Whole, we were talking about it as though there were an exception with sales. And the response I got from the Public Health Law Center is that it's about furnishing, not purchasing tobacco. So what that would mean is that if somebody over the age of 21 is furnishing or providing tobacco to someone under the age of 21 for a traditional ceremony, then that would not be, that person would not be held responsible for going against this ordinance. That would be fine because it would be for religious purposes. But there's not an exemption for purchasing commercial tobacco to be used for traditional purposes for someone who's under the age of 21. So they recommended that we could change the language so it's less confusing and uses the word furnishing instead of provision, which is what's currently in the ordinance, and that could address the confusion.
And the Grand Portage businesses that sell tobacco are not under the county ordinance or under the county tobacco licensing.
It's true. And so I did also talk with Marcia Eink, who's the tobacco coordinator for Grand Portage, to see what she thought about this and whether she thought it would have an impact on access to traditional tobacco. And she said she would have to look into it and talk to more people in the community. She's interested in doing a panel event similar to what we did here at ISD 166, but that she was in support of the ordinance and is working in her job through Grand Portage Health Services to actually grow traditional tobacco on site, and would look to other ways for increasing access and education about traditional tobacco use. So that was my response from Marcia, and that was also the response I got from the Public Health Law Center.
Any questions on that portion? Okay. Next steps?
So next steps will be the ordinance with all the ordinance, the ordinance as it appears in the packet right now would come to the board meeting next Tuesday. And at that point, the board will have a chance to vote on whether to publish the draft ordinance language and set a public hearing date.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry I didn't bring this up at the Committee of the Whole. I brought it up at the Public Health and Human Services Advisory Council, though, but just the whole lobelia language. Really curious to know more about that, if it's relevant.
What section is that in?
Well, it's in the first paragraph of the ordinance. Any ordinance relating to the licensing and regulation of the sale of tobacco, tobacco-related devices, electronic delivery devices, and nicotine or lobelia delivery products. I've never heard of that and before the advisory council meeting, and then I did a quick Google, and it's kind of like, huh, okay.
So do you want to remove that?
Well, I'm just really curious if, you know, it's,
necessary to have an
if it's
ordinance.
necessary, yeah, if we should talk to the law center about that, if other communities relating to T21 have questioned that or have had any discussion.
That would be a
around
question
it.
I would have to ask to the Public Health Law Center. I'm not familiar enough with lobelia to know the answer for you.
I'm not familiar
I
at
will say
all.
the Public Health Law Center has been helping communities across the state draft ordinances for Tobacco 21, and so often what they'll provide is they'll provide kind of boilerplate language based on what the existing county ordinance is, and then have areas like, for example, the compliance checks where they'll say this is something that could go one way or the other, or this is something for the county to look into. And there wasn't anything there related to lobelia. I could certainly ask about it, but I don't have an answer for you right now about why that's there, why to leave it in or take it out, but I could look into it for you.
Yeah,
And have
and
an answer by next week?
Hopefully.
Okay.
is it, and it's also in section 100 there, nicotine or lobelia. It's just something, I mean,
There might
is
be a
it a
different word.
traditional, like,
That's
I
the
don't.
name of a flower.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah, it's
so
a blue
it's like-
flower, right? Or
yeah,
is that
right.
like kind of a creeping, yeah.
So maybe there's something that you can do with that.
And Grace, correct me if I'm wrong, but that language is in Cook County's existing tobacco ordinance,
Yeah.
correct? This wasn't an addition related to the recent revisions for Tobacco 21.
I think so.
You think it is?
I think it is in there.
I think it's in our existing
yeah.
ordinance.
Okay.
But it's just,
So it could be that
It's good to keep things up to date
I'm
and-
not sure.
you know, and take irrelevant things out, you know, I'm just
Sure.
trying to be thorough.
So along the lines of being up to date and relevant, my only suggestion is to add a line to the ordinance that says that we ban the sale of all electronic delivery devices. How does the board feel about that?
What was that?
Banning the sale of all electronic delivery devices.
That's silence.
We talked a little bit about that at the community health board meeting and had a little presentation on the vaping epidemic. And there's still a lot that's not known. I think it was Maryland that banned it altogether for 9 months, or I forget how, a certain amount of time. It has been around a long time, vaping. My understanding, which is very, very limited, is that, well, the doctor that gave the presentation said that 80% of the illness caused by vaping is related to THC products, not sorry, it can be THC and nicotine together.
Because nicotine doesn't cause any damage.
Well,
Continue.
yeah, it's just that this illness is kind of the thing that's on the rise, and they're like, well, where is this coming from? And they're what again, my understanding is very limited from the news. It's that it's illicit THC products. It's not like where THC is legal and they have regulation on it. It's where you get into the black market still.
So
And
vaping, so banning the devices itself would not lean towards that because it's the illicit products that are causing it.
Well, and that's not for sure.
I'll
but that's
jump
kinda-
in. It said a lot of it's unknown.
Yeah.
This is very new. A lot of the reports that have come in about serious lung injury, they do involve illicit THC products, but they also they're looking into whether it might be an additive in them. they're just not sure. I mean, this is very, very new, and they know that the nicotine is causing issues with addiction and with, I mean, it's primarily addiction that the nicotine is a concern with right now, but for the lung injury piece, they really aren't sure what's causing it. And the doctor from the CHB who gave the presentation yesterday was saying often the diagnoses are through the process of elimination, like they don't have pneumonia, they don't have any sort of bacterial infection, so they're kind of in the dark as to why people are getting severe lung injuries and needing to be intubated or in ICU or passing away from vaping injury. So
a suggestion, Dave, is like the ATV ordinance, there was concerns when we opened the floodgates that people would die. So we could, if we did an anti-vaping line in there, part of the ordinance could be that it's a 1-year review. So that the ordinance would be reviewed after a year, and if it's determined that electronic delivery devices are not the problem, we can remove that from the ordinance at the 1-year review. Myron?
Yeah, I was just going to comment earlier that I think until it's conclusive in the research, it's better to wait and see. And could we add an ordinance banning vaping in another year?
We can have a public hearing for an ordinance at any time that we ask to have it, just since we're doing it now. I'm just tossing it.
I'm not advocating at all for vaping, but I just think from a legal point of view, we got to be careful taking something away that maybe is not, the issue.
Well, and it was also suggested by a community health board member to do the same thing. But I think it's important not to combine these issues, I think it's good to keep things separate here. We're dealing with two separate issues, and so to add on another, I'd be comfortable with an ordinance banning the sale of illicit vaping devices. But that's redundant. But I think it's important to keep the issues.
Just a show of hands who wants to leave the ordinance as is right now.
As is? I'm
Just
still curious
going-
about that lobelia.
Well, just in general, adding the vaping in is changing it.
I did before.
So not adding the vaping to it.
I would not add the vaping to it. There is a subdivision already addressing electronic delivery device, but it's under the 21 age
Yes.
restriction.
Ginny?
I would not be in favor right now.
And Myron, you said you're not in favor. Okay, just thought I'd throw it out there.
And I believe from our conversation at the Committee of the Whole, if not in previous presentations with Amanda from the American Lung Association, she shared that in jurisdictions where they have attempted to target certain products, that oftentimes they're opening themselves up to litigation because they're discriminating against a certain type of product. So cities, for example, who have banned menthol or flavored cigarettes have often been sued by tobacco companies.
Oh.
It's just it's a factor in
The powerful ones.
the decision-making process.
All
right.
One other thing is the FDA, I guess, is not regulating the vaping.
that is true. I mean, that's
Yeah.
been a big criticism by public health related to the vaping crisis. Now, the federal government is considering banning flavored vaping products, but that's, several years after they've been on the market unregulated.
So we can leave it up to the state and federal government to move forward on this. All right, so we will put it on next week's county board agenda to set a public hearing.
Wonderful. Let me know if you have any other questions before then, and thank you for taking the time to address this issue.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So board action. We have the approval of the 2021 MFIP biennial service agreement. Is there any discussion or questions on that? Can I get a motion to approve it?
Also move.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. So committee reports. I love to hear all your committee reports and everything you have to say, but I just want to tell you that there is another meeting scheduled to start in 15 minutes. So if you could make your reports brief, that would be wonderful. Arrowhead Economic Opportunity, Dave.
We meet tomorrow.
That was super brief. Arrowhead Health Alliance Joint Powers.
We did meet, and I guess I don't have anything substantial to report. Do you?
I would
add?
just mention the meeting that's taking place this week that was initiated by a subcommittee of the Arrowhead Health Alliance, the Arrowhead Behavioral Health Initiative. A group of members of that committee composed a letter to the leadership at Essentia Health to address perceptions amongst the human services providers and leaders, county directors and mental health providers who make up that committee about raising the question about how the Duluth expansions of both the Essentia Health and St. Luke's facilities are addressing behavioral health and mental health in particular. Many counties throughout the region have access to behavioral health services identified in their community health improvement needs assessments, Cook County included. So the ask was, how in your capital expansions are you addressing capacity for behavioral health in the Twin Ports and throughout the region? So a meeting is taking place tomorrow evening at the Birch Tree Center to meet with some leadership from Essentia Health to learn more about the expansion, how that will increase capacity for behavioral health, and for people to just share concerns about the lack of access throughout the region. Grace and I are going to attempt to connect to that via telepresence. And if not, one of us will try and make it down to Duluth for that meeting.
Great, thank you. Arrowhead Regional Corrections, Bobby.
Last month we met up at Arrowhead Juvenile Center and got a tour of the place. And what else did we do? And then Carol announced her retirement. So, in the search for a new director.
Okay.
And we meet on Friday.
Okay. Arrowhead Regional Development Council, Ginny.
We are meeting next week, and ARDC is celebrating its 50th anniversary. So we'll have a business meeting and a little fun, too.
Excellent. Community Health Board, Dave.
I'd say the biggest piece of news there is the search for a director, the director search, and the timeline there. Consultant is being used, and otherwise there was lots of talk about SHIP, and also regionally the T21, what's going on there. I think that was brought up at the SHAC conference, and I think it was the assistant commissioner was brought up, why isn't the state doing something? And it was even talked about as far as the vaping issue, why isn't that brought forward as an emergency? And I don't think it's something the governor can even call an emergency. The commissioner of health cannot call it an emergency. And I guess the governor can't because it's not a natural disaster.
I don't know if we've had any deaths in Minnesota. One.
I think Wisconsin also, so it's.
But for Minnesota, yeah.
Right.
That's why the governor can't call it a catastrophe yet.
Well, yeah, and I thought there was something about the natural side of things too. But otherwise, yeah, I think that's a brief summary there.
Thank you.
Unless, Allison, you wanted to add anything.
I think you covered it.
Carla and Jerry, Public Health.
Advisory Committee did not meet this month.
Okay. The Local Advisory for Children and Adult Mental Health.
We did meet, and Grace did a wonderful presentation on the crisis response team here and the service gaps in it, and talked about what Allison did. And the area that we also did a lot of talk about is transporting people, individuals that might have to go to Duluth or beyond if they don't have family or friends, and the difficulties And what was wonderful is the whole group brainstormed. It was such an engaging time, and you could see it coming to fruition, right? Participation was excellent.
Just to clarify, it was Grace Bouchard who made that good
Right.
presentation.
Yes.
Right.
We have two
Thank you.
Graces. Thank you so much. Healthcare Planning Committee, Ginny.
We did meet. Kay Granlund reported that this is going to be a mindfulness-based dementia care event coming up in cooperation with Community Higher Education. Let's see, there's lots of stuff going on. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and tomorrow there'll be a brown bag lunch in the topic of herbs and natural supports for stress. And I'll just a short report. When I can, I participate in NACO's call-in Health Steering Committee. They're still working on SNAP. I'm sure you'll be aware of some changes perhaps coming there. The National Institute of Health has awarded $945 million for the fiscal year of 2019. That's going to 41 states. I wasn't able to find out if Minnesota was part of it. I would hope that they would be, to help end addiction, a long-term initiative there. And the last one is, in September, Congress passed and the President signed continuing resolution to fund the government through November 21st. We don't know beyond that, so we'll be good until then.
Thank you. North Shore Collaborative, Dave.
I don't have anything to report. I don't think the last meeting I have was from August, so there hasn't been a,
I believe we meet again next month.
okay, yeah. A lot of months go in between there.
Emergency Preparedness.
We're meeting in another week, I think.
All right. And future meetings of note, Allison covered a little bit earlier. And then for the good of the order, as Ginny had stated, National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. There is quite a few that relate to public health and human services. It's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, LGBT History Month for US and Canada, and the National Bullying Prevention Month is also in October. And then many of you yesterday recognized Indigenous Peoples Day in Cook County. So those are my for the good of the order. Does anyone else have anything for the good of the order? And for the best of the order, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee of the Whole will start in 8 minutes.
This is what
Excuse me. Bobby, we're on for 2 o'clock on the 25th on Shared Highway Engineer, correct?